We're good. All right, good evening. Welcome. It's really exciting to be in this magnificent space and to have an opportunity to speak with the architects behind its creation. I'm Jeff Kress. I'm the provost here at JTS, and I'm glad to welcome those of you who are here. Our program tonight features renowned architects Todd Williams, Billie, Tsien, and Paul Schulhof, designers of this space and the spaces outside and many other well-known buildings across the globe, in conversation with Dr. Barbara Mann, the Chanuk Kex Professor of Jewish Literature here at JTS, author of, among other things, many other things, a book titled Space and Place in Jewish Studies. We plan to take questions from the audience later in the event. Those watching online should receive an email address that I'll be monitoring, so you can send your questions to provost@jtsa.edu, provost@jtsa.edu. So please send those in, and we'll take whichever ones we can. And now it's my honor to introduce the Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary and Bergen Research Professor of American Jewish History, Dr. Shuli Rubin Schwartz.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. Wonderful to welcome those of you here, and again, many of you who are tuning in on Zoom. This is the first in a series of many events in our opening season, which will give you all a taste of the breadth and depth of what we do here at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and it is a special honor that our first event features our architects and that it takes place in this beautiful space, one of many magnificent spaces that they designed and that we are so privileged to benefit from. I had some opportunity to work with the team over the years, as I was at that time the dean of the undergraduate college and the graduate school, and the thoughtfulness, the care, the attention that they paid to really every single step of this project was so palpable, so meaningful to witness. I learned so much in the process, and it's evident in really every inch of our new spaces here. I can't thank you enough now that I am in this role and I get to come to work every day and see the atrium fill with life, the performances in this space, students congregating, guests coming into the building as we come back to life, God willing, with COVID in the rear view mirror. It's wonderful to really be able to see this place fill with life. You know, in our tradition of reading the weekly Torah cycle, we have now spent many weeks reading about the building of the Mishkan, the portable tabernacle that the Israelites used when they were in the wilderness after the exodus from Egypt. After the Torah was given, this was really the first opportunity that the Israelites had to act on what it meant to live according to God's law. And it was all about intricate design. And the director, the overseer, the manager, the inspiration for that design was the artist Bezalel. And the Torah tells us, "Vayimale oto ruach Elohim b'chochma uvitfuna uvedat uvechol melacha." God endowed him with a divine spirit of skill, ability, and knowledge in every kind of craft. Those are the things that are palpable in this space. We are a space of knowledge. We are an educational institution. The light that comes into our atrium, the enlightenment signifies the enlightenment that it brings to us. And the tabernacle was built so that God's Spirit would dwell among us. And that sense of being in a sacred space is also palpable in all of these new spaces. You're giving us the opportunity to shine that light anew as we emerge from COVID. And I can't thank you enough. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with our wonderful professor, Dr. Barbara Mann, and I'm turning this over to her now.
Thank you, Shuli. How's the sound? Sound is okay? Okay. Optimism. I know this is an important word in your architectural practice. The idea that architecture is an act of optimism, that constructing a building contains a promise of a future of human life occupying that space. Indeed, all creative expression, even those works that address the darkest of times and most dire of conditions, all artistic expression insists on this fundamental premise. To make something is to fill absence with presence. Architecture, more than any other art form, enacts this premise by physically altering our built environment and believing that that change, that new space, will positively shape the lives of the people who use it. My own shorthand for this essential feature in all architecture is faith in design. Faith in design. I have faith in design. I believe that a space can be imagined and then actually built to materially support the lives of the people who use it and to create community. Faith in design. I believe that faith-based communities especially need physical spaces, sanctuaries, if you wish, to house our values and illuminate our vision. Design is never neutral, never just an empty form waiting to be filled. The design of this space emerged in part from dialogue and conversation, from listening to the needs and aspirations of the faculty and staff who work here and the students who fill our classrooms, from contemplation about how a newly rebuilt JTS campus would fit into and what it could contribute to the neighborhood of Morningside Heights, with which it shares a rich history. Tonight, we look forward to many more opportunities to continue these conversations, to fulfill these aspirations, and to bring community together in this space. Before I turn it over to the architects, our esteemed guests, and while I am speaking about faith and design, sanctuary and shelter, I want to say something about recent events. War is the opposite of architecture in every conceivable way. Not just the ruin of actual buildings, homes, schools, shops, hospitals, monuments, public squares, but the deliberate and tragic destruction of everything that architecture contains and symbolizes, of everything architecture means about the past, about our history, and for the future. So as we begin, I want to offer a prayer for all those in Ukraine whose lives have been upended, with the fervent wish that they find sanctuary and peace in the coming days. Billie, Todd, and Paul, I am truly honored to host you here this evening. We all are. You and your team have brought such a vast and rich experience as architects and teachers to this campus. The projects are too numerous to name, the list of awards and honors too long to detail. We've waited 2 years for this evening. Let's begin. Please.
Well, Paul is going to he's put this together, and we're going to try to talk a little bit about the process, but you're the architect of tonight's speech.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to be here this evening. We did put together some images of the process and the ideas behind it, starting with an image of JTS from not long after it was built, which of course is an imposing building, a very impressive building, and was built as such, not only as a sort of statement of the importance of the institution, but also what it means in the sort of larger context. And as it was initially built, was built as a cloister, and a cloister being the type of looking to the type of architecture that would represent some of the ideas of what it meant to be a seminary at that time, which was more about individual study and aspiring to, I think, a lot of what other practices of seminaries were doing at the time. But I think times have changed, and education has changed, and the sort of mission of JTS has also changed. And that's when we came to a building that was, and you can see here, the cloister remained, but also a very large library in the back.
Well, maybe go to the next image.
The courtyard was the center of the community, and at the same time, the courtyard had trees, but in a way, it was often barren of life. Students did come out and sit there when the weather was good, and even sometimes it wasn't. But you can see it was worn and felt unloved, although it was in fact the center of the community. I also think that what we see here is that the cloister wrapped around that space, and yet there wasn't really the engagement with the space from the spaces that were adjacent. I mean, the challenge was to reduce the size of the overall property and to intensify the experience by making a smaller, more relevant library, treasuring the books and texts that you have, taking care of them, not creating redundancies, creating comfortable places for kids to sit. An auditorium, which could serve for cantoral music as performances and lectures, that was comfortable for all and would welcome people from all over the city and actually all over the world in many ways. There was a desire to bring the students back onto campus. They were often in dorms adjacent to the community. They weren't as much part of the community as one had hoped. All in all, it was to, in a way, create a stronger sense of community. Of course, there were also classrooms. So the assignment was a strange one, which was to make, instead of growing an institution, to shrink its size but increase its intensity and its meaning.
An image of, just a satellite image of the campus when we began the project, and an overlay of some of the ideas initially, which was to retain the cloister and build a new building that would house the auditorium and new library and dormitories. And it was an incredibly ambitious project because it was trying to do many things at once. It was bringing, as Todd mentioned, the dormitories from outside in, trying to make a community, trying to make a new building that was in the back, but also influence the feeling you had when you arrived. And that was a lot of challenges that we were faced with when we began. And I think Todd said it best at the beginning, which was that it was really not about building a building, but building a campus and a community more so than just a single building, which led to this next plan that starts to show the complexity of where we ended up, which was not about just one building or volume, but a series of spaces, indoor and out, that came together for the larger needs of the JTS community.
Interestingly, of course, it also asked us to make sure you could continue to use the facility even as we were under construction. For those of you who were working here during that period, it was a challenge, to say the least. At any rate, interestingly, we've seemed to find the possibility of 3 courtyards along the way. Where we had 1, we now have 3. It's the kind of miracle of in a way.
Shopping in your own closet.
There you go.
And that's even after your closet got smaller. What are the things that you can find? But if we're going to go to the next one.
Throw out the old clothes and you can see what you've really got.
Yeah, send the old clothes to, what are those sites where they take your clothes and sell them? So you got rid of the library, and that site became a way to help fund what happened with this building. So as Todd said, the heart of the building is really the atrium, and the atrium is really the kind of enclosure of one kind of courtyard. And then there is still the outside space, which you see through the window, and I hear it is now covered with snow. But from the atrium, you can access this room, the library, other classrooms, the dining room, the courtyard beyond. And when you first walk into the building, that's where visitors come. But one of the things I wanted to say is it's a kind of, you know how you always thought your teachers, when you were a little kid, that your teachers lived at the school? Well, in a certain way, it's like now the students live at the school, but they live at the school in a very, I think in a very sort of rich way. So learning and living are really sort of entwined in this place. And I think that's part of the spirit of the Theological Seminary.
As we were resolving and finding the solution, first, the atrium was not a requirement. The atrium came, I guess, by cleaning out the closet and realizing you actually had some extra space that you didn't expect, and that might be the most precious space of all. But the other thing that I remember Billie saying is, gee, I would love to live in one of the dormitories and be able to take an elevator straight down and go into the library.
In my pajamas.
In your pajamas. So along the way, we found some additional spaces, and I think there are still spaces to be found. So I think, actually, strangely enough, there's still room in the closet. This is just the beginning. It is not the end. It's the beginning of a new page and a new phase.
Barbara mentioned just the process of talking to the JTS community, and we asked a number of questions to a really broad range of the people involved and working and students at JTS. And one of the things we asked is, what is the most important space? And everyone had something different to say. So some people said it's the library because this is the most amazing collection in the world or in the country, and that should be the center of JTS. And other people said, really, it's the classroom because it's education, and that's where the education happens. And other people said it's a Beit Midrash because that is the future of the education that we do, or the auditorium because it's where the programs will happen that reach out. And of course, they're all right, and it's what led to the idea that all of the pieces of JTS should be here on the ground floor when you arrive, and that conversation is what led to the invention of the atrium as the social center that connects to all the others, and it's how we've structured this presentation as well. This was an image of the courtyard right, I think, after our graduation, so the grass has not grown in, and in a very similar location today as we've made the atrium in that same spot. So taken over a portion of the cloister courtyard, actually raised up some of the courtyard to take it over. And again, an image from before of another portion of the courtyard, and then what it's turned into.
Yeah, I think coming into the building, instead of looking at a courtyard, you're actually looking at a place of all sorts of, where all sorts of activities are possible, the atrium. And at the same time, just to the side, you sense the courtyard itself, the garden. And I think it's a stronger garden. The atrium could be used, and I think last week we saw it was used for a student.
Artist in resident?
Yeah, an artist in resident program, and it seemed fantastic. The one was projecting up on the sloped surface of the ceiling and had a stage set up. Was really wonderful. Here it's simply a place for community and for gathering and having discussions. I think in all education situations, and in fact in libraries today, really people are looking to break down the community and allow for these private moments both of study and conversation. I think we really have found many, many spaces here in the building along the way.
So from the atrium space, there are all these very important spaces that come off of it, all on the ground floor. Of course, there's so much richness to the rest of JTS, but from here, you can go directly into the room we're in right now, the auditorium, which you probably see online, a portion of it. This is what the auditorium looks like from the back.
I adore the space, I'm afraid. We've done a few over the years, and this is by far the best one. I really, really feel great in this space. We have just a little bit of natural light. We're largely below grade, and these two windows on either side at the back really allow reflected light to come into the space, and also reinforcing that with artificial light. It feels like it's a kind of geode in which I think sound is very, very good. And we have the silver leaf that we were able to put along the back wall to help to give a kind of sparkle, yeah.
Here again from the atrium, we did not fill the courtyard. We actually raised a portion of it, but also left a smaller courtyard that now functions for a number of different uses, including for right off the cafeteria as a place to eat or a place to meet. And you can see that there are many spaces now, not just a singular outdoor space, but many that we've created, and we'll cover a few more before we end. And then within the archways, what was originally the cloister, small places to sit and talk to one other person, looking back towards the smaller courtyard that remains.
Well, food is so important to the community. You have the cafeteria, and then you have this sort of adjacent space where you can study and catch a cup of coffee, and then when the weather's nice, just simply take it outside. So I think there are all sorts of ways by which that conviviality and conversation can occur over food and study.
We're back again in the main atrium, and one of the classrooms directly off of it. It's actually connected in with the library and the archive, where there's a place for learning, but also a place for a very temperature-controlled, humidity-controlled space to bring out important volumes from the collection so that they can be seen in person and interacted with. They can also have a camera above that can broadcast them to a larger audience. So it's a very important part of this, is to bring that archive outside, and the ability for the JTS community and the larger community to see and interact with it.
I'm sorry, I love this space because I like the idea that there's this kind of soft, in a way, couch that extends around the edge of the space. So you can either be right at the table with the conversation or off to the side. You can graze, you can sit around it. It doesn't feel full of chairs and people, but actually it feels like a place to be. So I feel excited to see that filled up, actually.
And finally, the library, which now is visible right when you enter. And before, if you remember the way JTS was configured, you had to go all the way around the courtyard and the cloister and find your way to the library. Now when you come in through the front doors and past the elevators into the atrium, what's in front of you is the library itself, and welcomes people who come to JTS.
So, one of the things that you'll see is a two-story library. Ground floor is connected to the atrium space, and the second floor is actually connected to an outdoor terrace. And you'll start to see here images that were taken from holdings in the library itself. And Shuchi, who's sitting here someplace in the audience, there she is, was very involved in helping to choose the material with JTS, and then it's transferred to a felt.
So another thing, of course, there's compact shelving. In fact, it's a 3-story library because you have these incredible rare books and manuscripts, and they're, of course, safely in compact shelving down below. They brought up to the first level for study and for dissemination and discussion through technological means, and then there are also places where students can take books out, even sit out on the terrace outside with a book. Yeah, these are some of the texts, and what we were allowed to do was to, in a way, take images of them so they're simultaneously just pieces or fragments, and then to enlarge them to become these very large murals, in a way giving it a flavor that allows that actually, it's a kind of an abstraction of meaning to be extended to today and be part of the decoration of the place. So it feels like it's of a place. Yeah, there's one right in the background.
So we can see from the second floor, you're looking out to an outdoor terrace, which is actually the roof of the atrium space.
And you can, again, walk right out on the terrace, which is above next to the atrium above the courtyard. And we found that there were actually spontaneous meetings last fall in this space. So the idea of teaching outside is a terrific possibility. Yeah, no, the courtyard's lifted up a little bit, so it gets more light than it did before.
And the big form, of course, the sort of dark brown, copper-colored skylight is that shape inside the atrium, which is bringing light in.
I like to think of it as a mysterious mountain around which you can move. You can go over to walk around. This side actually is, we're on the side of the synagogue. And so from the synagogue, you can walk directly out and have, again, a conversation or reading.
You can see in this image, we didn't actually fill the courtyard. We just raised a portion of it. So we left about a quarter of it down below. It was a size that made sense. You'll see later, a sukkah can fit in it, and it's a place for classes or for there to be eating. But the rest of it is raised as well, and the result is actually many outdoor spaces that can be used simultaneously in different ways. And this image probably gives the best feeling of that. And we all know that outdoor space has a new meaning now, and part of making a flexible, enriched campus is that there are many types of spaces with many different uses throughout the year. And in this case, when classes can be outside, when they're outside, or in the foreground here, right next to the synagogue, there's a place to come outside from the synagogue directly. That's a new addition that really wasn't part of the original intention, and yet it evolved through the conversations and through the design process. Here we're seeing back a site plan along with a moedon, which is where the entire student body can come together in a lounge that they have control of and they have access to. It's outside of the dormitory, but it's on that upper level of the terrace. And it's a place for eating and for meeting and for congregating in a large group, which was very important to the students. There was a lot of listening to what the students needed and wanted as we were doing the design process. And this emerged as a space that was important in the old dormitories and one that was important as we were thinking through how to add to the campus here.
Well, if you go back, Paul, that image showed on the upper right-hand side is the largest of the courtyards. It's not been developed, but that is another opportunity there where, in fact, the two blue rectangles are the two sukkahs that you actually have here. And we look forward to reinstalling them on these two gardens in the fall in the near future. So it would be fantastic if one could actually do that, make that space. It really will take and add almost half again as much space as you've got up for outside activities.
A rendering of that space. So that's actually built on a portion of the developer's land, but it actually is JTS. It's JTS property and a future project for what can be developed here as both use for the future with a sukkah, but also another garden. And it really is that interweaving of indoor and outdoor spaces that we were trying to create the larger campus with.
Everything here has become accessible. You have a number of changes of level, but through soft slopes and so on, we've been able to make everything accessible. The students we wanted the students to be on campus, which they are. We wanted them to have their own independent entrance. They can take their bikes in and out and enter the building securely. So this is the entrance, which is on the south side of the building. Actually, also behind that volume is this hall actually here. So the students are directly above my head right now.
Another one of the studies that we had done of the texts from the library and starting to choose portions of them to try to abstract them and bring them into the experience of being in the dormitory. And in fact, every level of the dormitory has a different portion of text that's turned into these abstract felt tapestries that are on the walls.
In general incline as you come in, you've picked up your mail, you're walking up a loft incline, perhaps going to the moedon or to that gallery. This is an image of one of the dining areas upstairs, and it's a community area. Each of the floors has one of these spaces. They're generous kitchens in which groups of kids can cook together, create kosher hechsher meals, and then bring them out and make sure that the community is intact, whether you're studying or conversing or having a meal.
We're ending on an image that happened right before COVID, but right after the central atrium space was finished. I think this was the first time that the JTS community came together in it. You can see it's from a different era because there's no one wearing masks, but it was immediately used and immediately became a place for the JTS community to come together. We recently had a chance to walk through the dormitory and met a student who said that
she was a Jewish life director
Yeah.
She was very funny.
Yeah.
She said, well, I love, she called it the hub. I love going to the hub, except sometimes I don't go there because everybody else is there and I just need to get away.
Thank you. It's been a huge, huge gift to be able to work on this project and to now see it coming together. And as the masks come off and we rejoin the community, it's just, I can't wait for the programs that will occur here in this space. Really thrilled. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? So, I have a question and I'm still on. Anyone who's watching will take that question just to submit it to the email that you should have received, and we'll cover this. Well, so can I ask you to, I love this image of the closet. It reminded me a little bit of the room of requirement in Harry Potter. You know, sort of like what you need, it is there if you don't know it. I love the sort of, or the bag that has everything in it. So can you talk a little more about this, like the serendipity or, you know, the sort of this creation of surprise spaces that happens? It sounds like that happens often when you work together.
It's interesting. I think life, you think of architecture as being additive. I mean, you're always building something and adding on to it. And I think when things are easy, it's easy to add. And at a certain point, you realize that you maybe haven't thought through all of those. And I think this really just gave JTS the opportunity to rethink its priorities. And we happen to be lucky enough to be there and be excited to sort of dive into this problem. And I just saw it as this very simple problem to see how much space we could find in this place that seemed not to have any space, but to have been a series of additions. And I think you have in another 50 years, I'd like to think, well, I'm not here, but someone will be here to help you move on and find other treasures within this campus. I think the campus has it all. You don't have to be huge to be powerful and to be meaningful. And I think what we've got is something that really surprised us along the way. And it was just like a joy because we knew so little. Billie and I talked about Judaism 101. It was we're learning about this. The Jewish life is such a big part of New York in many ways in our own lives, but the sense of community was just a joy to really think that we could explore your community.
Is the other question that I had, I guess, sort of reaches beyond this space and to other spaces that you have built in New York City. You know, is there, you mentioned this sort of immersion in Judaism 101. Are there other kinds of things that you learned from building for this particular community that resonated with other buildings in New York City, either in relation to this idea of community or culture or connection to a neighborhood? I mean, New York, Northern Manhattan at least, is going through something. I'm not exactly sure what it will look like in 50 years or even in 10 years. And our neighbor to the east is sort of one example of that. Can you talk a little bit more broadly about what's happening in architecture in this part of the city from your point of view right now?
Well, I think architecture, like the world, is has always sort of kind of grown on the new and the sort of novel. And I think as we are in a situation where we have been forced to re-examine what's important to us, I think what we realize is that the new and the novel are passing. And so whatever it is that we do, we're trying to think about how things last. I mean, was joking about what you find in your closet and how you can make it better or how you can reuse it. But I think it's not only reusing, it's whatever you do needs to have meaning and last. And so, at least I know in what we're doing in our own studio, it's always been driven by wanting to be of value for other people. And I think that's becoming more pervasive. I see in what students are interested in architecture school. They're less interested in making forms and more interested in thinking about how can they be active in the world in a positive way.
And I think that that also happens in times of crises. I mean, after all, this pandemic has been, in my opinion, great for the spirit of New York. To have restaurants spilling into the streets and displacing privately parked cars. To have people, I think, walking and enjoying the parks more than ever before. Sure, New York has become, we have challenges for the ultra-wealthy versus the people who are poor. There's no question that's there. But among and within all of this, actually, I think that the city is really more vibrant than ever before. I feel this is a period bikes have come up. Again, people are we were talking at dinner tonight just how we enjoyed gardening for the first time. Simple pleasures like that, and I think you begin to see the city with new eyes that way. And I think certainly we feel that's true with this community, and we feel that's true actually as we look at an incredible treasure like Manhattan, whether it's a reappreciation of the water system that we've got, whatever it might be. I think we're really valuing the world that is around us. We need to do better, but I think we're good. It's a good time.
I think you're doing okay. I want to pick up, Billie, on something you said about the students who are coming up now. So the term faith and design, I first heard at a conference at the Harvard Graduate School, and it was put on by architecture graduate students who had organized across different faiths, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and they were training to be architects, but they were also asking about how their personal faith or their personal belief systems impacted their work as architects, and kind of moving against what I understood to be sort of normative ideas about the architect as just, this kind of neutral vehicle for the wishes of the client. And so it really, this idea that the building has to have meaning is something that I first encountered through the work of these young architecture students, sort of insisting that the world, the professional world that they were moving into, adjust to them. That mandate of allowing them to have a personal vision that would then kind of interact with whatever project they were involved in. So I feel like the generosity that your team has shown with this community is kind of an exemplary instance of that interaction.
I think it's interesting because I think in a certain way, and this isn't particular to this project, but I do think it's the way for a profession to change. I mean, of course, we can all complain about the millennials. We have complained about the millennials for one reason or another.
The millennials are okay.
But I think an important thing is that it is the belief in the importance of their own experience and how that can help shape the world. And whether it's a faith experience, whether it's a Black experience, whether it's an Asian experience, whether it's Latinx experience, there is a belief that can be part of what's shaping the world, and that was never really a part of what was considered okay for shaping the world. And hopefully, it's not a sea change, but every change is a cog change, and like a lot of little cogs start to turn, and I think there's some cogs turning that haven't turned in a really, really long time.
It is a delight and pleasure to be able to work for clients, and especially for clients that are institutions that have values and missions that are broad and deep and meaningful, and ones that you feel a kinship with. And of course, that's the way it is here, and that's the work we seek out, in part because you don't have to have your own personal feelings that override or are underneath something, but it's about exploring them with the larger community. And I find that to be the case for this very much. But it was, I think, a very important part for us to be listening and learning. I think that that's always the right way to start, is even if you do understand that there are ideas that you come with and beliefs that you come with, to begin also through the process of listening. And in the end, what we've heard was incredibly important. And when we think of buildings and architecture, and what is important, if we have an approach that says we design from the inside out, meaning that we're not designing the way it looks first, where it's about use and the emotion and feeling of within. And in Judaism, that seems also to be the way places are defined. It's not about what it looks like or the symbolism from the outside. It's more about what happens on the inside, the people who are here, the objects within, and what happens within the place. And that is what defines the work. And I think that is what defined whatever we did here. Oh, all right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, that's a beautiful way of thinking about the Hebrew word for place, which is Macomb, which is, as Shuli alluded to in her opening remarks, derives from this idea of the Mishkan, the sanctuary in the desert, which is not a permanent place. It's mobile, it's itinerant, it's responsive, it means something different wherever the people take it. And so I think this idea of activity and sort of lived behavior as really shaping the idea of space, of course, is essential for Judaism, but it's so beautifully housed, in this, what you call these unprogrammed spaces. So this example that you mentioned, Todd, of the projections the other night, I was blown away by that, to walk into the Atrium, and I've seen, that space be the hub that you mentioned, but then to also see it as this kind of object qua stage was just remarkable, and it made me very happy, that somebody thought of doing that, a student thought of doing that, hey, let's just put the pictures up. So do we have time? Do I have time for another sort of what, can you tell us what you're working on now? Share a little bit, please, if you're able.
Well, it's like letting your children go. We're not happy to let our child go, this one, but we're looking forward to it growing and its life. We're right now working on the interior of another interior, which I feel will come to life in a way that it never has before, which is the New York Philharmonic or David Geffen Hall. So in another year, that will open up. And I will say that it is a complete redesign, not only of the vessel of music, but actually the life of the place. Billie says we're going to ban beige, we're going to ban boredom in that building, and the building will be full of life. And then, of course, many people know that we're working on the Obama Presidential Library or Center in Chicago, and that's an exciting project because it's much, much, much more than a library. So, yeah, we have exciting projects, but weirdly enough, I can say that this is as wonderful a project as we've ever had, I think, because of the spirit, because we've done something here that we've never done before. It's a super complex development of an interior. The outside remains pretty staid.
You wouldn't know from driving up, but it's like, wow, something happened inside.
It's so crazy, makes me happy.
We can open it up, I think, first to the in-person, to people who are here in the hall. If there are questions, comments, anyone want to venture us something? Or if there's anything that's come through from the online audience, we can take them now as well. Please.
I would be interested to hear from the architect what affected them, if it has, I'm sorry. I personally like to hear from the architects how this project has, if it has, personally affected them and what they have learned from the experience.
I think I go and say first, years ago, we won a competition for a synagogue in Miami. It didn't get built, but we had an encounter with the Jewish community there, and growing up not Jewish, I felt this sense of community was unbelievable. I'd never experienced it. So I feel in this project, I've never experienced the power of the potential of these communal pieces coming together as a whole. So for me, I don't think I will have that experience in the future. I think it's a kind of a special experience that won't occur again, and I treasure it. Again, it is the putting together of these pieces. This room, for example, which I think is a spiritual room. It's a lecture hall. It's a joyous room, light-filled, but buried in the building, and adjacent to the atrium, which is another joyous space, and the library where I can just ascend these steps through the white Jerusalem stone up to the next level and walk out onto the roof. I don't know, these pieces coming together, the food, it's just something, it won't happen again. So for me, that was great.
Personally, growing up as only a Chinese person in my town in New Jersey, I always felt that I was Jewish, truly. And so I would go with my best friend to the Jewish youth group dances, and I just felt like, this is where I felt comfortable. So actually this experience has told me that being Chinese and being Jewish is pretty much the same thing.
I guess I'll only add that, hard to add to that.
Already said.
No, we don't do very many projects. We do very few at a time for a reason, because we want to really be able to dedicate ourselves. And we've lived this with you, and the people who we got to know, we know well now. It takes years to do a project like this, which means that...
Years off your life.
Which means you live through it, and you lose sleep over it for all the right reasons, because it's important, and because there are things that happen along the way that are challenges. There are things like COVID that happen along the way that we have to figure out, and that was a part of figuring out how to make this work. But we all move on in different ways, and yet we don't. And we know that the work that we leave behind is one that we need to feel proud of, but also needs to be used for a very long time. So we always feel a connection, and in particular this one, the people, the mission of what you're doing, and how it will change over time. So building around the world is exciting, but building in New York, in our backyard.
Yeah, the pieces, there are three pieces that we never expected. Number one, that the atrium wasn't even on our radar. It just happened. You gave us enough space that we could make this atrium that emerged. Then the Moadan. It's like, oh my God, where did that come from? We had a problem, and suddenly it appeared. And then now the future garden out there, it just seems to me like there are three treasures that we found, even while seeming that we're throwing things out of the closet trying to make space. We found more, so we keep finding more things. It's pretty great.
Thank you. I was curious about the wall hangings that you have in the library, and then also in the dorm area, and how you selected the texts that then were used as the source of inspiration for the design, and also if abstraction of those like more literal elements that you're taking from the written kind of calligraphy, if abstraction worked in your favor because of the kind of Jewish approach to imagery in contrast to other religions' approach to imagery?
The sections were chosen. In a certain way, it's almost as if Shuchi can answer.
The question was about the tapestries and the dorms, and the question of abstraction. I think that's...
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of complicated.
But I think the question, because it's more abstract as a concept, the question of abstraction is both practical and, I think, philosophical. In terms of practical, it comes from a part of the technique of making these felt pieces is that it's essentially hand done. And so the people are given a drawing and they're either dropping little drops of a kind of acrylic felt, or they're shredding pieces. So precision is not possible. Everything is by hand and by eye. So to make it abstract and not try to represent something that is absolutely readable was important, because something would have happened in the translation. And in the end, it's made in China. So, there's a lot of cultural shifts happening.
The calligraphy and the letter as an icon, that's beautiful.
Yeah, we did try to find things that we thought were beautiful, and then we would ask, is there any meaning here, or is there something that we shouldn't be doing or showing? So honestly, we had no idea what we're doing. We're just using our eyes, and the people who were making it had very little idea, but I think they also actually were excellent craftspeople.
We were also working with the librarian to choose them, so it's not simply...
And Shuchi, who's a little shy here, could tell you every little thing.
Some of it was we looked through a lot of books, and there's this beautiful manuscript that belonged to Tsien. And I think we did think through each floor and what it should do there. And for example, in dorms, we picked something from Prado Hakata, which had a certain sense of humor in it, in the drawings that were surrounding the text. And we sort of had them in the undergraduate dorms in certain levels. And then as you got to the senior dorms, we actually picked something that was from Rothschild and had certain seriousness to it. And I think the idea was that if you're studying here, you would want to know where it came from, and you would want to know what it's about. And I think, for example, in the library, that scribe is just beautiful, where I think his name is Kalinamus, in 1290. And that scribe wrote things where the drawing and the writing combined. Very often you would see a drawing, and you would see writing in the middle. His would just start connecting. And for us, like Todd is saying, we would see these things that we would see it from sort of an artistic point of view, not being able to read the text. And of course, that's what we would start seeing things that were so unusual and unique, and we would start picking those to put them in the library. And so we did have some thinking about it, but mostly we worked with the librarians to figure out what can go on the wall, what shouldn't go on the walls, and then, of course, the artistic part of view, and then where they go, which was sort of what we work with Todd and Billie, where they should really go. They shouldn't go everywhere. They need to go in specific areas, in specific places. So I think that's what our thought process was in putting these up.
I feel like those affective details are so important in this space where the students especially are living, working, studying, right? They have this kind of holistic relationship to the space, and then those affective details really kind of support their experience in a way that maybe they don't even appreciate in the moment, but definitely has an impact. Or maybe it would be nice to think it did.
I'm going to paraphrase a question that came in. You have created, or you're working on what we can consider civic temples, presidential library, arts venues. how would you compare and contrast working on this project, which has a religious, spiritual dimension, with those sorts of things?
The question,
It's a good question.
which is?
The question, the sort of comparing working on these kind of civic temples, or thinking of the Geffen Hall, even the Obama Library, as opposed to this place, which is, again, a faith-based community, a place of work and study and living, but is there a distinction for you?
Well, I think there is. I mean, years ago, Billie and I, before even Paul, we sat on hoping that we could, we would push aside commercial work, because we thought that the slower, longer values that were held in non-commercial projects, of course everything is commercial in some way, held greater power. It was a slower life, a longer, richer life, and that we always wanted to work for people we respected. And that's why this worked out great. I mean, just immediately sensed this was a place we respected and admired, and people for whom we wanted to work. So that's the way life should be, I think.
You're saying that they feel very much the same.
They're all the
Yeah,
same. I mean, they're the
think so.
same. I mean, you want to work with people you like, and you can do this. You can do this. Yeah.
There's one in the back.
There's someone in the back, Jeff. Sorry. We'll come back.
I'm here as a guest from opposite of the street, from Union Theological Seminary, and also I'm an outsider, actually visiting professor from Germany, so I don't know really a lot of the background. But I just wonder, at Union, when they built this large structure, many of our students were also had varied opinions or were opposed of changing the building. I don't know, was there a similar kind of heavy discussions here, or is it just a special thing our union students are so, I don't know, like to discuss or oppose this change of the building? I just wonder whether everybody welcomed these changes which went on here, or whether you had fundamental opposition or discussion.
I think the big challenge here, and speaking as somebody who lived through the construction, was living through being in a construction site while the building was being built. I think that was the big challenge. And I mean, I can't speak for every student and every member of the faculty and the staff, but I think everybody sort of welcomed the change, but it's a lot. The noise and the sort of the ongoing stress. This was all before COVID. So, I don't know, do you guys have thoughts on what's happening across the street? Do you know? Did you sort of notice what's happening there? I think I will say, I think that there was some concern about our neighbor, the building right next to us. And I personally think that those concerns have been alleviated. There were some of us who thought, oh, it's going to be dark at noon every day, the shade, and we'll never get any sun. And it turned out that didn't happen. We still have lots of sun, and it's not intrusive in that way. But I look at what's happening across the street, and I wonder about it. Do you guys have any thoughts?
Well, I'll say more about here at JTS. I think anytime there's change that's significant, and this is a significant change, and it was ambitious. It is ambitious, and that always leads to questions, as it should. I think that was one of the questions: is this going to make for a darkened courtyard and less light, less lively space? And I think that was also a good question at the time, and one that we were asked by many people. we felt confident because we had looked at it and looked at the shadows and over time in different seasons and indeed tried to arrange things in a way that worked. I think also the process of working with a developer next door, there was a very smart way of allowing them to build, but doing it in a particular way. And even though they built very tall, it doesn't really impact the experience here in a way that is all that negative. It actually feels quite lively, and it feels like a background.
It's because it's the middle of the block also.
We did make one decision, the palette. We chose, the original building here is red brick, relatively dark red brick and limestone. So what we chose as the palette was the limestone palette. Why? Because it was in fact lighter. And so we wanted to use brick, and we went to search for cost-effective brick and literally went to Utah and talked to people out there and how could we get an inexpensive brick that felt a little bit like limestone. And so we pushed that palette. And then, of course, we see these walls in here have a slight cream color to them. So I think it's always a palette of largely light materials back here, and then with a small splash of dark materials, a vibrant color. I think that also helps to feel, I guess this is just talking about design, but it was, I feel, a good decision. The big copper monitor there seems, I think, interestingly different. It's in the surround that's relatively light. So contrast rather than just simply trying to imagine that you're following through. You actually have to rethink how you relate to things. And that's what we have to do with change. You can't throw it all out. You have to retain all you can and still make it fresh. So
I also think one of the things that happened was that the students and the faculty got new spaces that they could use. And I actually don't know what's happening with the Union, whether that tower is taking away space. It's not clear, because I don't know what the project is, whether it's giving back something that the community didn't have before. And so I think in the end, one of the things that helps this project is, yes, the size of the library is reduced and it was taken away, but because that happened, you're able to get these other things that you didn't have before. So that's why it's hard to say, because from the outside, we only see the big tower, which seems to be coming up from what was.
No, we can't judge that, but I do think that it was a very wise decision that was made by the people who came before us to choose to reduce the campus to bring it together, and then we were lucky enough to be agents in that. And
I'd just like to respond to that question because I think JTS did a really good job at the beginning of the process and asking all the various constituencies of people who would live here, work here, go to school here, asking them to weigh in on what they wanted to see happen in terms of the building process. And I think that was a very good process before we even began. Probably had a good deal to do with the lack of opposition, that people felt they were a part of the planning process.
But we felt we were asked to speak to many people and listen to them, and that is always the best way to begin. And it's not to say that there was no controversy or questions, but if it does, as you say, I think that's right. When you begin by listening, then it means that what you end up with is a result of that and helps deal with the questions and controversies that come up.
It looks like you had either a response or a question to that.
Before we're going there, I do want to say that one of the people that are not here tonight is Bob Rifkin, Bob and Arlene. And they were so important to us as clients years before, and also encouraging us to think about this place, which we came to before we even heard of this project. So if Bob's out there, I just want to say hello.
Thank you for mentioning, yeah. Please.
Hello, I came in late, so I apologize if you touched on this. Stop me in the middle if you have. When there's so many different things going on at JTS and so many different groups undergrads that live here 24/7, some people that come in just to work during the day. The way that architects plan a space versus how people end up using a space sometimes does not, there can be a disconnect. So in the planning process, how did you anticipate like so many different groups using the same spaces? And was there any kind of, maybe this is for general architecture projects, how a space ends up being used by the people who are here after the project is done versus intentions going in? And I don't know if is that something that comes in the process, or I'm also an urban studies major over at Columbia, so this is something I think on an even bigger scale, like urban space. So I don't know if you have any comments on anything about that.
Well, interestingly, when people think of projects, they think of, I need an auditorium, a room, a classroom here. That's the way we also think of people. That's Billie's that, and I'm this. But it's the space between things that is as important or more important than the things themselves. So I think we always think of architecture as, whenever we're given a problem, we always value the distance between things as the way by which we actually can come together. That is, in fact, the heart and soul of a campus, which is that we have enough of these surprise spaces as we are planning things that they naturally evolve into places people want to congregate. I don't know if that answers your questions, but I think we think of that at every moment.
Well, but I think one of the great things about architecture is that we're making containers for people's lives, but then you shape the spaces after we go. And hopefully they can accommodate the different kinds of things that you may want to do in them, which may have never been anything that we imagine. In fact, that would be the best thing if you did things in these spaces that we never imagined.
So that's the space between people, the same thing, which is what we do together is more important than what we do individually. And that's the way you need to operate, and I think you must operate in the world and in this world, in this place. I don't see the difference between programming buildings and allowing this sort of space for joints to move and people to converse.
I think the challenge is even more than just trying to foresee what it's like when it opens, which is a big challenge, and that's done, I think, with the understanding of the people who know how JTS works and what the needs are. And in that way, that's difficult, but not that difficult to try to say, okay, well, what are all the different permutations of how this room will be used, sometimes for music and sometimes for lectures, sometimes as small groups and sometimes for large. Same thing with the atrium. And that we can do. The even harder challenge is how will the institution change over time of JTS and then make sure that what we're doing has an ability to change with it. That is then less about, I think, in what Todd and Billie are saying about the specific uses and more about how people come together and the way people converse and are together as a community. And if you can focus on that and create a really rich series of spaces, then it's something that can live on and have an endurance to it. You know, if you look at our plan and some of the images of all these outdoor spaces and said we did this because we knew that outdoor spaces was going to be important during COVID to have, we had no idea. And yet somehow by creating all of these spaces, that is something that can use and change and have uses beyond what we would originally imagine. And that's the best we can do, is try to do that and set a palette for then people to start painting on and figuring out what happens within it.
One more, yeah, sure.
There's a classic anthology about conservative Judaism, which of course the Jewish Theological Seminary represents, entitled Tradition and Change. And I think you, as the builders of the seminary, have done that beautifully, and I congratulate you for keeping the tradition but also changing it for the new century. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's great.
That's a beautiful way to end.
That's a really way to end. Jeff is going to come up and close us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you for providing that wonderful segue and ending. I just wanted to say thank you, thank you, thank you. As someone who uses this building every day, I was struck, you had a picture here of the archways that used to be outdoor breezeways, and you, I guess, strategically planted these rounded, very comfortable seats. And when I walk in and I walk by in the dining room, there is very often people sitting in those seats, engaged in conversation. I was thinking, wow, a couple of years ago, that was just an arch. And it was a lovely arch, like the arch. But now it's a place for relationship, and it's a place for discussion and for people to come together. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for being here tonight. So thank you all. Thank you, Barbara, for moderating this. And just to thank a bunch of other people who made this happen. I should mention Linda Zisk, Janie Schneider, Stacy Fireman in the development team, Andrea Glick and Beth Meyerowitz in communications, Rabbi Julia Andelman and the community engagement team, and our new media wizard, Chris Hickey in the back. Thank you, Chris. Our maintenance and security staffs, and a very special thank you for coordinating this event, as well as my life for the past 8 months, to Michelle Mering, who made this all happen. So thank you all, and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.